Today in the EU, what are the controversies around the novel foods? The term novel foods is becoming more popular by the day, but to make it to the European supermarkets, it needs to be assessed by the EU Food Safety Authority and then get greenlighted from the European Commission. Novel foods include innovative products like cricket flour and UV-treated vegetables, as well as traditional foods from other regions. While some novel foods are embraced by the agriculture industry, others, particularly alternative proteins, have sparked heated debates and political tensions. But why do these novel foods provoke such strong reactions, and how Europe is navigating this culinary evolution? Hello and welcome. I am Evi Chiori, and this is Today in the EU. To understand these controversies, we spoke with our Agrifood reporter, Sofía Sánchez Manzanaro. Hi, Sofía. Welcome back to our studio.
Hello, Evie. Very happy to be here.
So when we started discussing some more summer topics, you suggested something that I found very interesting. And by that, we mean the controversies related to novel foods. First of all, what do we refer to when we say novel foods exactly?
So, under EU law, any food that was not present in the diet of Europeans before May 1997 is considered to be a novel food. And this is a legal definition, which means it's very arbitrary. It's just based on a cutoff date chosen by EU legislators, 1997. So, novel foods need to be assessed by the EU Food Safety Authority, which is this agency called EFSA, based in Parma, Italy. And then they get the green light from the European Commission before they can be sold in European supermarkets.
Can you also give us some examples? I'm sure our listeners would want to know what we are referring to when we say novel foods.
Yeah, so novel food can be a newly developed food product, such as cricket flour, but also food produced using innovative methods of production. Like some vegetables nowadays are being treated with UV light that kills viruses and bacteria and extends the shelf life of the product. But it can also be food that is not necessarily new and is traditional to other cultures in other parts of the world outside the EU. For example, that's the case of chia seeds, which was a staple food already during the time of Aztecs in Central America and is still widely consumed in countries like Mexico and Guatemala, among others. In Europe, since a few years ago, we can find chia seeds in smoothies and desserts, but because they weren't widely used before 1997, they are regulated as a novel food.
And how is the agriculture and farming industry reacting to novel foods?
Well, in many ways, I think novel foods are innovative and beneficial for the agri-food industry in general. For instance, if you make vegetables free of pathogens and extend their shelf life thanks to the UV treatment, that is good for producers too. And products that come from different parts of the world, like baobab fruit, which is a novel food, or again, chia seeds, are generally not seen as a threat by EU agriculture. But there are a few novel foods that have really stirred the pot. They have become a political hot topic even. These are alternatives to traditional animal protein, mainly, such as insects. Some insect products, a few, are already approved in the EU, such as cricket flour, and meat produced in laboratories, known as cultured meat or lab-grown meat. But this is not approved in the EU yet, but we consider that it will fall under the category of novel foods. Certain farming groups and political parties also oppose new proteins that are plant-based, for instance, alternatives to meat made from fermented fungi or also algae treated in a certain way, just to replace traditional meat products from cattle, pigs, etc. The reality is that the food population will reach a peak into 50, and there are concerns about not being enough protein products for everyone to be in a healthy state. An increase in livestock production will be also very problematic because it's also linked to the damage of our environmental resources, like polluting soils and water, and will lead to more emissions. So that's why scientific communities are trying to develop these alternatives.
But what's striking is the heated public discussion around them and the number of controversies, in some ways, we could say conspiracies, related to novel foods. Sofía, why is this the case, according to you?
So it is heated indeed, and there's a widespread conspiracy online about the World Economic Forum, that is this international organization that wants to promote cooperation between the private and public sector, which claims that the plot of this global elite is to replace farmed animals for insects and to force the world to eat bugs, as they say. So there is certainly not a plot of world leaders to end animal farming, and the insects that are approved in Europe for consumption are very far from replacing sales of meat. But it is a very emotional topic because it appeals to tradition and to our way of living.
And it appears far-right groups are exploiting arguments against novel foods. What's behind this?
Food and culinary traditions are something that people are very attached to, and particularly in Europe. Because food is also embedded in our memory, and it brings back our childhood memories in general. So it's very easy to instrumentalize by political parties, populist movements. And concerning lab-grown meat, the debate has been reignited recently at the Council of Agriculture Ministers, with mainly Austria, Italy, France, but also Hungary coming out as the most vocal opponents. Italy and France are very protective of their agricultural sectors and have very strong and powerful farming organizations that oppose these products.
Sì, sono I peggiori nemici questi provvedimenti e queste scelte.
Italian Agriculture Minister Lollobrigida has been quite outspoken about this, claiming that lab meat is an enemy of the environment and could lead to potential health risks. And what does the general population of consumers think about it?
The reality is that there's still reluctance among many towards these products, but attitudes are shifting, and there are more and more consumers willing to try them. In many European countries, at least half of the population is favorable to try these products, according to a recent YouGov survey. This was commissioned by the Good Food Institute. So let's be reminded the Good Food Institute is a non-profit organization that wants to promote alternative proteins. But they asked 16,000 people across 15 European countries about their attitude towards lab-grown meat. And they found that 69% of the respondents in Portugal, 58% in Spain, 65% in Germany, and 57% in Belgium will support the sale of cultivated meat if regulators prove that it's safe and is nutritious.
It's true that people are curious creatures, so I would assume that this number will keep growing with the time passing.
I think so too. I think the reluctance was bigger in early years, and these products are becoming more mainstream, and people are also seeking in general, mainly new generations, to cut their meat consumption. So they probably see this as a good option more and more.
L'Italia è la prima nazione che dice no al cibo sintetico.
When it comes to lab-raised meat, the debate got particularly intensified in Italy when the Italian Minister of Agriculture, Francesco Lollobrigida, banned its production and its marketing. Can you explain what exactly happened there?
So the Italian government proposed and approved legislation last year to ban the production and sale of lab-grown meat. However, this was never enforced. Why? Because first, they cannot unilaterally ban a product that is not authorized at the EU level. And secondly, this kind of measure threatens the single market of the European Union. And countries need to notify the European Commission before taking any measure that can impact the single market. And they didn't do that. However, it will be interesting to see how things will develop once the first product of lab-grown meat is approved at the EU. Very recently, on 26 July, a company applied for the authorization of lab-grown meat. The product they are aiming to sell is foie gras. This is produced with cultivated duck cells. And it shows that the lab-grown industry is targeting at very niche premium markets that can afford a luxurious product like lab-produced foie gras. I would like to remind our listeners that the only way to obtain foie gras is through the force feeding of geese and ducks. This is a process called gavage in French, so that their livers become really fat. This practice is only allowed in 5 EU countries: Bulgaria, Spain, Hungary, France, and the region of Wallonia in Belgium. It raises a lot of ethical questions, even among the non-vegetarians. So it's interesting that the first lab-grown product comes to fill this market niche that is opening for people that want to continue enjoying this French culinary delicacy without animal cruelty.
But could European or Italian food traditions be actually challenged by the food innovation?
So some of the concerns expressed by EU ministers or farmers are genuine. I mean, if we were to replace even half of our protein intake with insects or lab-grown meat, this would really hit the agricultural industry and probably even our landscapes, because animals grazing are important for maintaining certain landscapes in Europe. I mean, it's not science fiction, but it's still really far from reality we live in. As I explained above, the commercial production of meat at an accessible cost is still a barrier. Also, the regulation barriers are still there. We should also ask ourselves when we discuss these things what tradition really means, what food tradition is. And Southern Europeans, as myself, I'm Spanish, or yourself, we're usually very proud and protective of our traditional dishes. But how long have they existed for? Italian Alberto Grandi, an academic, wrote a book called The Invented Designation of Origin. And he debunked the origins of many well-known Italian dishes, such as pizza, carbonara, and tiramisu. It seems like many of these were not known, very well known in Italy until the economic boom that followed World War II. So the second half of the 20th century, we could say less than 100 years ago. And many of these are drastically different to their real original versions. Some of them have been developed thanks to Italians migrating to other countries like the United States. So it seems like innovation in the 20th century and a flourishing economy, new methods of processing and marketing could have created an important part of Italy's traditional cuisine as we know it nowadays. So maybe tradition and innovation are not completely opposed concepts.
Thank you very much, Sofia. I am Evkiori, and this was the Day in the EU podcast. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can find us on all streaming platforms. You can get in touch with us by leaving a comment or a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help us a lot to spread the word about our work, but also understand what topics you like listening to. This episode was produced by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada, Nicoleta Yonta, and me. Thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow morning. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.